So kind of the idea today of the infrastructure and real estate panel, which is something perhaps starting from quite general, working down to something specific. I wanted to start off not with all of us introducing ourselves, because you'll probably forget what we said. Rather, start with Evgeny, who's the first Deputy Minister of Infrastructure. Maybe he can give us an overview of the infrastructure assets market here in Ukraine. And please, as you start your presentation, introduce yourself and your especially for myself, I hope for you as well, we're interested in your background as well and how you arrived where you are today.
Thank you very much. I'll start with a short introduction of myself. I'm currently the first Deputy Minister of Infrastructure of Ukraine and also the head of the Supervisory Board of Ukrainian Railroads. I actually arrived to the Ministry of Infrastructure from Ukrainian Railways, where I was responsible for the corporatization of the company. As far as you know, it's one of the biggest state enterprise corporatization success at the moment. Still, we have a number of issues currently with the current status, but the railways are moving on with the reforms and with the changes inside. I can give a short glimpse, short information regarding the current status of Ukrainian infrastructure and the moving of the reforms within the sector. Mostly I will try to make the most accent on the railways, since it's my part of responsibility and this is the biggest part of Ukrainian infrastructure. Historically, for Ukrainian infrastructure sector, only the seaports sector was interesting for the investors. We have about 14 ports, currently seaports in Ukraine, and a number of them has a private investment within. Unfortunately, until now, Ukraine have not developed the well-prepared mechanism of investing into the seaport infrastructure. But 3 years ago, we have started the process of the reforms, which was related to separation of the infrastructure and state stevedores, in order to make possibility for further privatization of the state stevedores. And currently it was decided that the stevedore companies will be put into the concession for the private investments. And by the end of this year, we're expecting that respective legislation which will give the possibility to give the stevedore company for concession will be finalized and adopted. We already have 2 big projects at the pilot projects for concession. These are 2 ports. One of them is a port Olvia. This is a deep sea port near Mykolaiv, which is currently 100% state-owned and one of the most interesting objects for strategic investment in Ukraine, in seaport area, because it doesn't have private money still and nobody invested there yet. And the second one is a sea river port located in Kherson, Kherson port, which is especially interested for grain and agro-logistics, taking into account a deep involvement into the river infrastructure and river transport. We're expecting that next 3-5 years, it will be possible to make further steps in the concession of the assets of the state in seaport area. First of all, we should mention the Chernomorsk, previously Ilyichovsk seaport, which is the biggest container terminal in Ukraine. The ministry is taking the position that it should be put into the concession, most likely partially in the parts to different investors. And the second, the Port Yuzhny, the biggest and the most deepest sea port in Ukraine. Also, if we are talking regarding the seaport industry, it worth mentioning a number of possibilities for realization of the private stevedore projects. We have a number of private stevedore companies operating in almost all ports of Ukraine, mostly successfully in Odessa, Yuzhny and Mykolaiv. We currently have a very good example of kind of public-private partnership in realization of the Cargill investment projects in Port Yuzhny for developing one of the biggest grain logistic hubs there. And there are a number of opportunities almost in all the ports for hosting the big investments from the strategic companies which are strategically interested in this sector. Moving on to the road sector, it's less interesting, but we never talked much regarding the possibility of hosting the international investments or international company in road construction sector. We started to talk it last year. The end of last year, the new legislation on financing of the road construction industry in Ukraine was adopted and should start from the operation from the next year and should boost the number of capital expenditures for construction and renovation of the roads at least twice from the very beginning, from about 15-16 billion hryvnia this year to at least 30-35 billion starting from the next year. This should give a possibility for more companies to enter the market and to propose the services of road construction. And we see during the last 2 years that with increasing of the expenditure on the road construction, we see not enough international and Ukrainian players in this market, which sometimes lead to the situation that we are not able to finalize the tenders as a projects. So this is a very interesting possibility for international road construction, infrastructure construction companies to enter the market at the moment, taking into account that the state has a long-term plans for investment into this sector. The third thing I would like to talk on is the railroads, or our railroads. For Ukraine, railroads is the main part of transport system. About 60% of Ukrainian transport is represented by railroads. It's the biggest railway company in Europe, apart from Russia. And we are in top 10, actually on the 8th position in the biggest railroads of the world. Last year we have proclaimed the strategy for further reforms and changing of the market, of the railway market. It is a long-term story, but it's dramatic changes for the whole industry and the whole sector, I mean railway sector. Currently we have a state monopolist, state enterprise which is operating on the market. We are planning that in 5 years term we'll be able to open the market for private railway operators, which will actually lead to formalization or opening of the biggest railway market in Europe. It will be about 4 times bigger than a Polish market, which was opened about 15 years ago, and much bigger than market in other European countries. I mean the cargo market, railway cargo. We are from the very beginning looking for opportunities to have a strategic investors and strategic companies for operating on the market. Why it's so important for us? Because currently we have a negative experience with rolling stock demonopolization, which took part in Ukraine about 10-12 years ago, when there was a possibility for private operators to invest into the rolling stock in Ukraine. But unfortunately, we have seen that there was actually no investment. Although, according to all the calculations, the payback period of investment into the universal wagons in Ukraine is about 7-10 years, but we see that there are almost no private operators, only the captive operators of big industrial holdings. It was partially related to the regulation which was on the market until recently, and there was a non-fair tariff regulation between private and state operators of the wagons. We have taking off this regulation from the beginning of the year and are planning to finalize this adoption within the next couple of months. And this will lead to a more fair and competitive situation on the wagon market, which is also could be a very good target for investing for the strategic investor in this sector. Also, I must say that Ukrlandfarming itself is one of the biggest asset holder in the country. It was evaluated during the corporatization process about 2 years ago, and at that moment it was evaluated for about roughly about 15 billion US dollars at the moment. A part of these assets, or out of these assets, at least 1/3 are those assets which will be sold out as either non-core assets or those assets which are not in use at the moment, because we have an old Soviet system of all the infrastructure, and current volume of Ukrainian transportation doesn't need so extensive system. So there will be a huge amount of real estates, warehouses, depots which will be privatized or sold out within the next 2-3 years. And this will be, I guess I'm not the expert in the real estate market, but I guess it should make a really huge impact on the regional possibilities for investment in post-privatization or privatization objects in real estate sector. If there are any particular question on any part of infrastructure, I will be happy to give you the comments and answers for all the questions.
Actually, I had a quick question. I was wondering if you could please bring down the microscope a little bit and be a little bit more specific. Myself, Yuri, and Dan, our businesses are impacted exactly zero by the ports, the railways, or even the highways projects you've described. These infrastructure projects impact system capital management and the 10 or 20 other billionaires that currently do business in Ukraine. I was wondering if the government has a plan for small and medium enterprises, and I mean, I drive to Hungary all the time. It's a 2-lane highway. Can you be a little bit more specific on how you can impact other businesses than simply the 20 people that run the country?
Very nice. If you're talking regarding road construction is not related to Ukrainian oligarchs, for example. These are smaller companies, either Ukrainian or big international companies, which are operating on the market. So here, SKM is not really related to the projects, not really related to the scene. Yes, it's quite specific business, and I'm not sure whether we have people in the, but the panel is infrastructure and real estate. Hopes there are some people related to infrastructure here. It's really quite a specific business related to road construction and infrastructure construction. What is really important here that unlike the previous years, there is a clear plan for next 5-10 years in road construction for putting money in there. There is adopted legislation in this respect, and the money flow should start from the beginning of the next year. And this should lead to additional market volume for new participants and for the current participants. It's quite a significant development on the story of this sector. I mean, road construction, road infrastructure. Regarding the railroads, really it's a very difficult story because historically Ukrainian railways were mostly related and mostly working with the heavy industry, and all of us know quite well who are the main players in this market. And even the example which I have mentioned regarding the rolling stock clearly shows that the liberalization which was done 12 years ago with wagon liberalization, when private companies got the possibility and right to buy the wagons for operating on the railways, lead it mostly only to the situation when several big steel holdings, metallurgic holdings, have formed their own wagon fleets, but it didn't lead to the possibility of international or Ukrainian smaller investment to invest huge amount of money into the market. It was really a negative thing, and we have studied this negative experience, and that's why we have changed the situation with tariff regulations this year for wagon market, and you know, it's also quite a specific business. It's not the thing like you buy a shopping mall and get the rent. It's a business which should be run, and you should need some experience in this respect, but it's a highly profitable business. Ukraine, last year, we have a peak of deficit in rolling stock. It was about 8,000 of wagons, out of about 80,000 of total fleet. It's like about 10% of deficit of the wagons. It shows that there is a huge demand for this part of the market. But still, we do not see a number of investors entered the market at the moment and started to build the rolling stock fleet. Again, it was due to the situation with non-fair tariff regulation of the market. They had changed the situation from the February this year, and now we are actively welcoming, let's say, the investors who are ready to enter into this segment in Ukraine. There are several international companies who are closely looking to the possibilities, mostly in universal wagon fleet or in universal wagon market and grain wagons. You know, we have a growth of grain export each year, and the fleet of grain wagons was not increasing during the last 5 years. Almost, you know, was almost no. There was almost no increase during the last 5 years.
It's just a quick question. You're talking about road transportation as well as the railway cars. Maybe this is a naive question, but I'm just curious. With the advent of China now becoming much more involved basically in agro and all that, and the corridor basically like of Ukraine being beside Europe and all that, what are the plans in general for infrastructure in terms of trucking as well as railway cars going back and forth towards Europe and towards China? Is that something that's on the horizon, or what is the stature of that at this point? And what's the plans on Ukraine's point? Specifically for railroad, I heard with China there was a lot that was moving. If you can comment on that.
Yeah, sure. Then give a short, you know, short comment, because we can speak quite much about this. Short comment regarding the situation with communication with China in railway communication generally. We have a huge turnover with China in traditional ways through seaports, especially in agro-logistics. You know, China and the Far East is currently one of the biggest clients, but the biggest targets of Ukrainian agro-export in different parts, starting from grain, barley, and so on. What we also have started last year, China is currently very actively developing the project of railway connection with northern and western regions of China, which are not well developed and not well connected with seaports, and the logistic is quite expensive there. We started with a test container train, which went through Black Sea, Georgia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, and went to China and get back. We saw a number of, it was a year ago, we saw a number of problems related to business feasibility or economics of this project, and made several strategic steps within the year. First of all, we saw that there is a bottleneck within the Black Sea transportation, because the Black Sea, on the Black Sea there is a deficit of RoRo, especially railway RoRo transportation. In order to overcome this, we have transferred to Ukrainian Railways 2 state RoRos, specialized on wagon transportation, and they will be starting operating during this year, one in the next month, another one in about 6 months, and this should give a clear and stable communication on the Black Sea. Also, Ukrainian Railways became a part of the transport corridor with Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Kazakhstan, which gave us the clear possibility, first of all, to give the direct tariff through all the line between Europe and China. We are now finalizing the agreements on the level of the tariffs, which should be compatible with other alternative routes, mostly through Russia, sure. Also it gives a possibility for clear all-way tracking of all the cargoes which will go through the line. As well, we have started now the project of developing of 2 logistics centers in the western part of Ukraine, railway logistics centers, which should give the possibility to improve the logistic between Ukraine Railways and Hungary, Slovakia, and Poland, which are the nearest hubs for our transport flows. So these are, like the main glimpse and the main points. Also, from the next year, we're expecting a huge, or at least a considerable amount of traffic from Iran. The guys there are currently finalizing or working on the railway line which should connect Azerbaijan and Iran. And this will be the shortest way from central and northern parts of Iran to Europe through Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Ukraine. So it's another huge market which could start about mid or beginning of 2018 as soon as they finalize all the infrastructure things there.
Perfect. Thank you very much. This was a perfect opportunity to segue into Jock and System Capital Management, who is, of course, by far and away the largest user of the ports and railway in Ukraine. Unfortunately, Jock had an emergency and just had to leave about half an hour ago. So we're going to move on from generalized macro infrastructure for the economy of Ukraine to Mr. Dan Rappaport, who is, well, he'll tell you his story best, probably.
Thank you so much. Dear translators, I tend to speak quickly, so if you start falling behind, just wave your hand and I'll slow down. I apologize, I operate on a different speed. By the way, railroad transport is our #1 investment idea right now. So I'm hoping you and I will have a chance to discuss it later because I have some questions. So my name is Dan Rappaport. I spent 20 years working in Russia as an investment banker. I was more or less the bridge between Western finance and Russian companies looking for capital. I ran out of Russia in 2012, which is something I'm fairly proud of. And this happened because of my opposition to Mr. Putin and my support for guys like Nemtsov, Navalny, and Yashin. So in 2012, I moved to Washington, D.C., where I was a foreign policy advisor, working primarily with Republicans, but none of the Trump people, I want to say that right now. And I received funding from my Russian clients to come to Ukraine, invest $100 million in infrastructure, in general projects with a 20% IRR. And then on that, I had a couple other clients piggyback. So I have about a $400 million in soft and hard commitments to invest in this country. So although I was asked to talk about infrastructure and real estate, my presentation is more general. It's about my experience in Ukraine so far. So I'm going to start. Made a decision to move to Kyiv from Washington, D.C. in October of 2016. I arrived with a confirmed mandate to invest $100 million and also a $300 million in soft money commitments to piggyback on any interesting Ukrainian deals. I arrived in Kyiv with these funds and with lots of optimism, which is something I lack today. Since October, I have met with over 250 different people. There were investors, businessmen, politicians, journalists, military leaders, and also opposition. My goal was to complete a jigsaw puzzle from all the available pieces that I had, so that I would see the current big picture of the social, political, and economic situation in Ukraine. I needed to understand the basics. So I have traveled to the very north, south, east, and west borders of this country, and I spoke with the local population about their life and their concerns. Every trip and every meeting helped build a picture of the current investment climate. Now, what did I realize in the past 6 months that was not evident to me before I moved to Kyiv? One thing painfully obvious is that although Ukrainian people have clearly spoken at the Maidan Revolution of 2014, the current government is ignoring their will. Ukraine inherited loads of political baggage from their Soviet and Russian periods, and it's preventing Ukraine as a country from moving towards European integration that the Ukrainian people demanded. Although I have identified several very interesting investment opportunities with over 20% IRR, and I looked at IT, real estate, energy, transport, defense, light and heavy manufacturing. All of these projects are dependent on a transparent and honest legal and political system. However, the current system is not transparent and honest. And furthermore, in my humble opinion, it cannot be reformed from within. It can only be destroyed and rebuilt. Unfortunately, the current government became part of the problem and not the solution, and it needs to be changed. The fish rots from the head, and the president is a key player in all Ukrainian reforms. But the current president is lacking the will and the power to fight corruption and to move the country in the right direction. Hence, the high level of resignations and firings from reform-minded Ukrainian politicians over the last 3 years. To name the few, Nalivaychenko, Abramovichus, Saakashvili, Loshkin, Pivovarsky, Sakhverlidze, and others. But there is an alternative. Ukraine has countless smart, honest patriots who are mainly excluded from the current government. These people are more concerned about their country and their people, their name and history, rather than their bank account. In order to move Ukraine in the right direction, an independent, strong, and determined president and Rada need to make tough changes towards reform. The Gordian knot of government kleptocracy and crony politics must be cut. Unfortunately, it cannot be untangled. The frustrating fact for me is that the road to a successful Ukrainian democracy, rule of law, prosperity, security, and human rights is obvious. Ukraine does not need to reinvent the wheel. The same post-communist transition road was taken by Romania, Slovakia, Poland, and the Baltic countries 25 years ago. It's a well-known fact that the Ukrainian nominal GDP was about $4,000 per year in 1990. It was the same as Poland. Poland immediately embraced the capitalistic European path and quadrupled it to almost 16,000 per annum today, while Ukraine lost the last 30 years of reforms and has the lowest GDP in Europe right after Moldova. It's 1/2 of what it was in 1990, barely above $2,000 per annum. Ukraine currently is slightly ahead of Syria, Pakistan, and Laos, which is a shame. So what's the current situation today? I don't need to tell you this, you live in this country, most of you live in this country, you understand this, you know this. But the Ukrainian stock market is dead. The publicly listed Ukrainian ADRs have lost 90% of their value. Most of them have lost 90%, some have lost 30%, some are slightly up, but most of them are down minus 90%. The largest bank became insolvent and was nationalized. There's practically no lending to business. There's public protests in front of the Rada and Central Bank on a weekly basis. The hryvnia is devalued by over 200% since Maidan. The foreign direct investment is negligible. The nominal GDP is at a historical low at 2,200 per annum. The projected 2017 inflation rate is 10%. Currency reserves are slightly up at 15 billion. There's also a lingering war in the East. The corruption level is at pre-Maidan level. USA, even under Obama, became frustrated with lack of changes, and the Trump administration has adopted a decisively pro-Russian position. Ukraine today is hardly a convincing case for international investors, but all can change very quickly with the right leadership. How am I doing? Okay? For comparison on what can be achieved in just 8 years, we can look at Georgia, where Michael Saakashvili quadrupled Georgian economy from about 1,000 nominal GDP to almost 4,000 per person. The same path was projected for Ukraine after Maidan in 2014. The only major difference is that Saakashvili had the iron will to implement unpopular decisions and the desire to imprison thousands of government officials for crime and corruption. He also orchestrated a countrywide lustration of the old guard. Unfortunately, the same did not happen in Ukraine. And 3 years after Maidan revolution, we're witnessing the same corrupt crony capitalism that caused the citizens to rise up against Yanukovych. This is a great shame. Ukraine has everything it takes to become a European superpower, wealthier than Poland and the Baltics. Ukraine can and will receive and should receive billions of dollars in foreign direct investments from all over the world. Ukraine can stand up to Russia. The problem is not the people. The problem is the old guard that is left over from the old system. The system must die. Only once this old guard leaves and is removed from positions of power and influence can Ukraine be truly on the right path towards its sovereignty, independence, prosperity, and global respect. Ironically, this path towards Europe will not be painful for the country. All the worst economic and political shocks have already happened in Ukraine. With the removal of the entrenched ruling class, the positive changes can be made and felt by the population almost immediately. We all know what needs to be done to help Ukraine, but we're waiting for someone else to do it. Personally, as a Ukrainian patriot, I hope this change happens sooner rather than later. And I would like to leave you with a relevant quote by an American anthropologist and author, Margaret Mead. Never doubt what a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that has ever changed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dan.
I'm happy to answer any specific questions about my 6 months in Ukraine, if you have an interest.
So where are you going to spend your money?
Well, I'm going to hopefully, well, actually, the two projects that we have invested in or would like to invest in, I found a way to sell Ukrainian products in America, and there are doors being sold through Home Depot. So if you're American, go to Home Depot, buy a Ukrainian door. And that's in the process, but we're having difficulty with the factory, although the first shipments are there and they've already been accepted. And the other investment that we've actually already discussed and approved would be buying gondolas or rail cars, because Ukraine has such tremendous deficit of these types of wagons, and they're the most liquid. And I'd love to get your opinion on that later outside this room. But the reason we're looking at rail cars is because it's an asset that can be easily removed from the country if this country deteriorates. So at this point, we haven't really done any capital investments that are stationary, although we have seen some interesting real estate deals that are yielding, 12 to 14% dollars on dollars. But here we have a problem with the currency regulations, and we're speaking with EBRD about us piggybacking on them or them piggybacking on us, because EBRD is exempt from currency controls. Any other questions?
This is interesting comments on the very first question we had was, how can we change Ukraine's perception so that people invest here? And in the first two speakers, you may have noticed that we've had a discussion about infrastructure, but great government spending in infrastructure that would impact a total of 10 people, and the richest people in Ukraine. And another individual who has $400 million to invest in Ukraine, and on a risk-adjusted basis can't find appropriate investments. Are we beginning to answer that question? I don't think that there isn't money for Ukraine. The problem is what we're starting to address here.
One of the other things I wanted to mention, it's extremely difficult for institutional investors to access Ukraine at this point, because there's not a single investment bank that's based in Ukraine at this point. And when I was in Russia in the early 90s, when Credit Suisse came in 1993, their Moscow office became the most profitable office globally, more profitable than New York. And that's because when you have a monopoly on the access to the investors, you end up doing very well. And there are a lot of interesting transactions that are happening in Ukraine, but the institutional money is not able to access these investments because there is nobody to represent them. And although I'm well aware of Dragon, Concord, ICU, and Empire, they're all high-quality local banks, most U.S. institutional investors that are looking to access an emerging market as perceivably risky as Ukraine right now, they're looking to use the CYA policy. Everybody knows what that is, right? CYA, cover your ass. Okay, so they will go in using a bulge bracket or even a second-tier bank just to make sure that if it does blow up, they have someone that's going to protect their investment. So, I mean, I've been trying to find somebody in the States through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the U.S. Department of Commerce who would be interested in coming in here, because I really feel this is a time to set up in Ukraine and to give Ukrainian companies and Ukrainian companies access to these investors, which are global. Thank you.
Okay, now we actually transition to Yuri, who has made investments here in Ukraine. Would love to hear your opinion. Oh, my apologies.
Sorry, you mentioned something about the corruption in Ukraine and the role of Poroshenko and European Union, whatever. We have two scenarios in the future. One, actually, there'll be a new leader, or Poroshenko wakes up and clean up the mess and everything, or Trump warms up to Russia and Ukraine remains as a buffer zone. In the second case, do you think still the economy is going to flourish if Ukraine remains as a buffer zone for the next, God knows, 25 years or something? Especially about real estate.
I was a foreign policy advisor in DC for 5 years, so I'm very much aware of the current situation in terms of Russia. And in my personal opinion, and the opinion of the Army Corps of Engineers, is that the Kerchensky Bridge is a myth. Although it can be built, it cannot be used for 3 reasons. It's the soil, it's the tides, and it's the ice that's there. Russia needs a land bridge to Crimea, and even if it's going to be used as a military base only, therefore I feel the conflict in Ukraine is only frozen, and it will not end regardless of whatever happens. I also feel that Trump's election is directly a result of Russian interference, and I feel that Trump has promised to the Russians that he will remove the sanctions, and the reason he's not doing it right now is because of all the all the inquiries into his Russian connections. I was at the Republican convention in Cincinnati in July of 2016, and there was a 64-page Republican platform that was presented to the Trump people, and it outlined everything from abortion, school prayer, help to Israel, help to Africa. I mean, basically everything that the Republican Party was campaigning on. And out of those 64 pages, there were 122 topics that were covered, and they made one change. Do you know what one change they made in the Republican platform? Providing lethal weapons to Ukraine. Okay, it's just one example that why I feel that the Trump administration is criminal. I feel that this has been the largest infiltration of the U.S. politics by a foreign power, and that is the reason that Trump is trying so hard to cover up Russia. So what I think is going to happen, I think that during this Zapad 2017 exercises in Belarus, there will be a soft annexation of Belarus. I think that Putin is trying very hard to rearm, and he's not able to rearm because of the technological sanctions that are in place. Mainly 2 things, that's electronics and optics. To give you an example, in 2015, Russia announced with great fanfare the manufacture of new T-14 Armata tank. They placed an order for 2,700 tanks at Ural's Vagon Mash, out of which only 70 tanks have been made. The reason they made only 70 tanks, although they had ordered for 2,700, is because they don't have the optics and the electronics. So the Russians were trying to be sly, and they were buying it in Belgium and Germany and Netherlands, scraping off made in Germany and putting made in Russia sticker, and they got caught. So the bottom line is, if you ask me, the sanctions that Putin wants removed more than anything are the technological ones. I'm sorry, I went sideways from your point, didn't I?
My question was, if Ukraine remains as a buffer zone for many years to come, what happens to the economy, especially in real estate? What do you see? Is Russia going to keep Ukraine poor, as their plan is to do it, or somehow the Ukrainian economy is still going to flourish as a buffer zone?
I understand your question. I cannot predict the future, but I'll tell you this. Ukraine is moving in the right direction. except it's moving significantly slower than it can, and that we want it to move in, unless there's a third Maidan that's orchestrated by the Kremlin, and Ukraine falls back under the Russian wing, which, having spoken with the guys at the front lines, I think it's very highly doubtful. Ukraine was under some sort of occupation for the last 800 years, since 1240. This is the first 3 years of freedom Ukraine has really had. Now, granted, you can make an argument that the Kazakhs had their own government, so on and so on, but in reality, the Kievan Rus was destroyed in the 1240 Mongol invasion. So, one sec, I understand. The thing is, the country is moving in the right direction. I don't anticipate a full-scale Russian invasion, and I feel that this country will develop, and I'm hoping it'll develop faster. As far as a buffer zone, you can look at the Baltic states and Poland also as a buffer zone, but it's not interfering in their economic development, right?
So it's going to be a big risk to invest if Ukraine remains as a buffer. That was my question.
Right. I mean,
Like, that's a risk, basically.
every
Like,
country is a buffer
if someone wants
zone.
to invest here, and if we think, or like if you are pessimist and say, okay, Ukraine is going to remain as a buffer zone, what's going to happen to the investment? That was my question.
United States is a buffer zone between Mexico and Canada. So every country is a buffer zone between somebody. I think Ukraine will do fine. I just want it to happen sooner rather than later. I like this country. I want to live here.
I just wanted to put things into some perspective here. Can anyone guess, for example, what total foreign direct investment in first half of 2016 was? Or new foreign direct investment in first half 2016 was? New foreign investment in first half of 2016 was $2 billion. He's $400 million. The total FDI investment in the entire country, and I guess this is over however many, is $45 billion. Kind of addressing that gentleman's question, I mean, this is an incredibly small market. An aircraft carrier worth of investment doubles FDI here, and these markets, well, this is perhaps the positive thing, these markets explode. I mean, it doesn't take a big difference here. FDI, foreign direct investment in this country is amazingly, incredibly small. Let's talk to some of the foreign direct investment.
Thank you. From my side, I'll try to bring a little bit additional or different perspective, because for foreign investors, if they hear some of the theses that have been presented so far, there is a Ukrainian anecdote that we're not going to be able to sell an elephant like that. Therefore, I would like to say I do understand the frustration. I personally came back from US a little bit earlier in December of 2003, and as of now, Ukraine is an amazing land of opportunities. And if we are to compare certain things, what happened in Russia with opening of one investment bank, or in Poland, I would kindly suggest to compare apples to apples in terms of examples and in terms of the timing. Yes, we could compare as well what happened in 2005 when FDI was $7.4 billion, and there's a true FDI that came to the country with the privatization of Kyrgyzstan and so on. But I think even those pages of history have been turned, and we have to focus on the most recent history in order to compare apples to apples. In order to bring a little bit more positive perspective and to share the potential of where we can be going, I just would like to give my background in order to understand where we came from. When I came back to Ukraine, I was first, according to IFC terminology, investment hire. IFC, International Financial Corporation, private arm of the World Bank, participating in financing quite a few nice, interesting properties which still exist today, such as Hyatt Regency Kyiv. By the way, Hyatt Regency Kyiv was at one point the most expensive Hyatt Regency in the world, and eventually this property beat all of our IFC financial models and eventually made a prepayment on the loan. But that was then. I left in 2006 into my own business. As of today, I'm co-founding shareholder of one of the largest e-commerce businesses in Ukraine called Yakabu.ua. We are focused in books and a bunch of other SKUs. I'm a managing partner and a president of private joint stock venture Toronto Kyiv. which is a Canadian-Ukrainian joint venture, and it's one of the owning and focusing on one of the largest mixed-use real estate property in Ukraine. And plus I have a lot of other responsibilities, such as a member of the board of Canada-Ukraine Chamber of Commerce. And I would like to say, just to kind of to build up from Luke's question, in order how we will overcome some negative aspects and things. There are two recommendations, and I can elaborate in a very detail if there are concrete questions for us, Ukrainian businessmen, and for foreign investors. And the first thesis is that patience is a virtue, and never give up and never take no for an answer, and try to be creative for investor. What it means, because today's investors market, and any investor, doesn't matter if it's fund present or not present locally, if it's a bank, if it is intermediary, if it's IB or similar function, it is their market, and they have, it's true, a variety of geographies to invest in. And throughout my experience, of course, I heard many times, amazing project, would like to work with you, we would like to invest, but Ukraine. And therefore, when I'm saying patience is a virtue, each one of us as entrepreneurs, as people who are hands-on, we have to become ambassadors of Ukraine and focus not only on facts that bring frustration, because they know those facts without us, but focus also on positive things, because there are many positive things that are taking place, and they are quite fundamental. And I can bring a few examples of them. We're talking about FDI, large corporations coming in, but for example, in IT business, one of my tenants, they started business during crisis in 2013, 2014. Eventually, the person who initiated business without having anybody behind him, with no funds, no banks, just investing his salary, his brains, and into a product that he developed, he became, if I believe correctly, millionaires under 25 in Forbes. Today, he owns a company which is one of the top suppliers of Apple. He's not an outsourced company, he's a product developer, hires about 150 people, invests himself into startups, created his investment fund, and invests in real estate as well, because the matter of real estate is not only brick and mortar, it's a matter of creating ecosystem for the future. And these people is a living example right now that somebody has a long-term approach on the market. And something that I'm trying to say to everyone, maybe it sounds like a paradox or even like a contradiction, but it's a second chance for first mover advantage for foreign investors right now. Second chance for first mover advantage doesn't make sense, but it's true, because we had our first chance after the Orange Revolution. We didn't use as a country our chance for whatever reasons. And this is a truly second chance. Yes, it is of a different flavor. Yes, it's in a different time zone, but at the same time, valuations right now are at the bottom. And my personal belief, whether I'm correct or not, we have reached the bottom. And in the last 2 to 3 quarters, me personally, I can, dictate about what I know, what I experience with my hands-on experience every day. We see rejuvenation in every single subsegment of real estate. We see the increase of pipeline, and this pipeline increasing not only in numbers, it is enhancing in quality. The nature of this pipeline is different. For instance, if in 2015 people were coming and looking at different space just to kind of sniff information and to get terms and conditions which they used to renegotiate their current leases in other locations, now decision makers are coming, rolling their sleeves, and really investing money into relocation. Evidence of that, in the last 6 months, I signed 5 lease deals on an office space. Speaking about hospitality aspect, Holiday Inn is a part of our property. Within the last 18 months, we have consecutive better performance than budgeted. Yes, it is true that all of us, doesn't matter in infrastructure, in FDI, we start from a smaller base, and any approval seems to be a little bit over-exaggerated. But 18 months, that's a track record. That's not 2 months. That's not only 1 quarter. And we see increase in business overall, and this business is also diversified. And just coming back, something that was stated by the first deputy minister is that the initiatives stated here, they also positively and indirectly affect our business, because, for example, when you talk to hospitality professionals, they say why our hospitality market is aimed towards business traffic and less of a tourist traffic. Why tourists are not coming? Yes, we have spikes because of football. Yes, we have spikes because of Eurovision. It's because of a number of reasons. Because today, your traveler, they look at effective cost all in. Before, they used to look at Prague or Warsaw, and Lufthansa takes them to Holiday Inns or to intercontinentals, and internal travel is cheap, and it's understood. But before, to Kyiv, there was some Ukrainian airline taking you to some Ukrainian hotel. Now things are changing. Now internal travel is becoming easier. And it's not only about airplanes or low-cost companies coming in. We're talking about, the initiative stated here. So indirectly, that will affect us, because the international traveler, for them, we became a place on the map, and they will come in and they will explore the country. End of the day, we'll have a greater cash flows. End of the day, that will positively reflect it on a DCF model and valuations. End of the day, will attract more income, more investment. So everything makes sense, and it's not just an ideas or theories. This is what's happening right now. To support this argument again, in 2015. Because I'm talking to a large variety of investors, intermediary, you could not get a conversation going about investment of 10 million in the country. Now people put in bids and proposals for 60, 70 million, which, yes, it's still kind of on the lower side of valuation, but if you look from a positive side, that didn't happen before. So what I'm trying to say right now, again, is another beautiful chance for foreign investors or for local entrepreneurs who are not wasting time complaining, I'm sorry, but focused on doing something to really bring the value. But again, patience is a virtue, and you have to be creative for investor. And when I'm saying creative, because I can talk about it further, but for example, Dan says something that a typical investor would request, 20% IRR. I heard 35, somebody says 15. And of course, local lending is limited, or almost there is no local lending, especially if we talk about significant big projects. However, you can be creative, and if you believe in a long-term increase of valuation, you can structure deals in a hybrid, creative manner. For example, a fixed income component of investment can bring an X percent return on your investment, and then common exit or some convertible instrument or some additional cash sweep will allow you to get additional Y component of return of your investment, and maybe X plus Y will be equal to your 20%. And you have to do the homework for investor. Investor is not going to do the homework for you, because today's investors market, and they have a large variety of potential leads to process, and therefore, it's up to us, Ukrainian present, entrepreneurs and developers and real estate infrastructure players, to do the proper homework. And there is, and there is light on the end of the tunnel. And my personal, not only belief, but the things that I feel and see, that light is becoming brighter. I mean, I'll be happy to answer concrete questions or some strategy implementation, but I see things a little bit differently, and it's not only a matter of seeing, but believing and walking that path.
Thank you very much.
With the elections coming up in the near future, let's say about 2 years from now, and you were saying that it's the long game in terms of investing, specifically in real estate, because I have a few good friends like yourself that are in real estate, and you guys have the patience of gold, that's what I call it. Do you believe that with the next elections coming up and this rise around the world, specifically in Ukraine, I've been here 17 years, so I have a right to pick on it, that the rise of populism and people making huge promises and the whole bit, is that going to be scaring away most of the investors into coming, specifically into real estate or infrastructure or the overall thing, or are they going to wait until after the elections to see where all the chips are going to fall? Because it's kind of a very unstable time right now. Will they continue? Will they? I think you get the point of my question, or no?
I do, and I will answer real quick from my point, and I think it will be very useful to hear opinion of everybody. Again, to answer a hypothetical future, hypothetical future is not very productive. However, I would say yes and no. Yes, because there is always an investor who's super cautious. For example, I've been negotiating with one New York-based investment fund who said, Yuri, Ukraine, I'm not investing into Europe right now because of Brexit, XYZ, and so on. Therefore, they always will be scared off. However, it's not going to have an effect because I see the amazing drive from younger generation, people who were born after 91, they're already creating value, creating businesses, they creating our demand for our spaces, and they don't care about reforms. They don't know half of the names of the people who are in office now, not to mention even re-election that's coming up. And they have different mentality, and this is amazing. And many of them are in IT business, many of them are in increasing service industry, and I think if we'll focus for that, the effect of elections is going to be minimal.
It's not really, I mean, let me rephrase that a bit, but I want to keep in my first point. But if you look at a company, let's create a fictional company, and this company has a revolving door of people going in and out consistently. Why would somebody want to go work for this company? In a way, if I take a look at politics, if I look at how businesses run in Ukraine, from my experience of being here, it's been a consistent revolving door of people that you don't know who's going to be in power in the next 2 years, or who. It's not like Canada where you understand the system in general, you know where you're investing your money. But right now is the revolving door of consistent change, and now with the elections of populism is what I'm saying. Is this, maybe it's a question for at the end, it's how is this affecting consumer confidence and attracting?
Yeah, indeed, the rise of popularity of the populist is not only a threat for investors, but also a threat for the country as such, because we see that those forces who are, considered as the populists, they're mostly destructive, even in current situation where they have the minority, and it's very difficult to imagine what could be if they would have a better positions. But what I can say as the person who is inside of the political process somehow, that I do not believe at all that there is any possibility for any re-elections in this autumn or whatever, because it's simply just in full against of all the interests of all the parties who may be influencing this. And we still have 2.5 years until next elections. It's quite a long period of time. And what I can say is a crucial time in order to make and show the changes and the opportunities, not the opportunities, but show the changes for the electorate and for people to make a right vote within these 2.5 years. And I'm sure that there is a possibility to do it in the right way and to keep the balance in the country and not to give the possibility for populists to have the majority. That's right. So this is a threat, but me personally, I'm quite optimistic, first of all, because we have time, and I do not believe in any area elections, just not logical, and it's against the interest of everybody. And the second time, we, some of the positive things, I'm talking not on the business now, I'm talking regarding the people who make the vote, like European Association, like visa-free regimes and other things which were proclaimed, they are given, and there's a question that we need to, not we but the politicians, need to continue to make the job properly and to be ready for the next elections.
My question...
Yeah, I've actually written a platform for one of the presidential candidates who is unannounced yet. And you tell me if it's populist or not. And this is a very simplified platform which we will expand upon in order to provide the numbers for it. But here's what the message that this president, next president of Ukraine, needs to deliver to the people. Ukraine must be free and independent. There should be a transparent and honest government for all the people. The same laws should apply for all citizens. Obviously, the elimination of all corruption, defending of the rights of the Ukrainians regardless of their ethnicity, the hiring of qualified, clean political outsiders, the firing of those clean political outsiders that eventually become corrupted, the prosecution of the old guards and the recovery of funds, the decrease in the size and the increase in the wages of the government apparatus, the making shadow economy legal and bringing into the light, make government smaller and more efficient, cut regulations and hassle for business and investors. There should be no oligarch contacts or funds in the government, and Ukraine should make their move towards European Union. We can use the Polish or the Baltics model. Is this populist? But all of this is relevant. All of this can be done.
It's relevant depending on how that it's being, depending on what the conversation and the tone that it's being.
I agree. I think that the person that's going to run this country needs to cut out the cancer that is infecting this country, and then after that, it's going to be clear sailing. And maybe I'm an idealistic, naive outsider, but I know it can be done. I have seen it done. And again, I go back to the Saakashvili model, and I've known Michael for a couple of years, and I know who he is. I know his strong sides and his weak sides, but what he did in Georgia is absolutely amazing. Yes, he didn't get reelected. Yes, he made a lot of people angry. But you know what he said? And this is interesting. He said, Georgians, we're not Europeans. We're Eastern, Vostochные люди. He says, the Georgians are not used to buckling their seatbelt. They're not used to obeying the rules. They're not used to paying their taxes. I made the Georgians pay their taxes, buckle their seatbelts, and follow the law. They cursed me. They cried, but they still did it. In the process, he made a lot of enemies. But what he did in Georgia was a miracle. He really was. So I'm hoping that the same can be applied here, but because this is a European country with a European mentality, there will be less of pushback. The other thing that Saakashvili did is he eliminated the Vary v Zakonie, which was a big problem in Georgia, and this is not a big problem in Ukraine. Now, I'm not saying Saakashvili is going to be president. He cannot be president. He doesn't have the residency requirement. But I definitely think that this man, along with some of the other reformers that have left the government, should definitely have an opportunity to move this country in the right direction.
Maybe my question is not for the first deputy. However, in the Soviet times, Ukraine had a large airlines market. And does the ministry have any plans to develop local airports by regulating airline market using domestic planes? Because Ukraine is able to produce short distance airplanes and Antonov 148, I think.
Yeah, 158 is better, it's more modern. Okay, it's a very good question. Actually, it's not in my part of competence because I'm more concentrated on railways, but I can give the comment because it's quite an actual topic. We had the plan at the middle of the last year to make the domestic state-owned company, aircraft company, which should operate on Antonov 158 and make the short distance flights within Ukraine. Unfortunately, we have not realized this project yet. I hopefully that it will have the possibility to be done. It is related to a number of issues and number of questions. State financing is usually the focus of Ukроборонпром on cargo planes, not on passenger planes. There are a lot of things in this line. What was initiated and what was jointly done last year is increase of some domestic flights of MAU. Unfortunately, the prices are not proper, and the start of the flights between Kyiv and Odessa on quite a low rate. I must say that from a business point of view, because it was a private company which was operating, it showed that it is considerable only during the summer period of time and not paid back during the whole year. What is considered for this year? There are some negotiations with the private companies for increasing the amount of flights within the Ukraine. And there is quite a huge job during the last year on starting for operation of smaller local airports. There are examples like Kherson, Rovno, Chernovtsi, and others which started operating since last year, which were not in operation for 5 to 10 years. So this is a focus for this year, and this is the situation for it now.
Okay, related infrastructure. What is strategy regarding airports on state-owned privatization?
Currently, we have only 2 state-owned airports. It's Boryspil and Lviv. All others are formally in a communal, local community ownership, but mostly they are, quasi-privatized, put in the concession on or lease of the companies, private companies. There are good examples like Kharkiv or Zhuliany, which are operating really well, and we see the good investments from the private operators, and these are good examples. There are negative examples like some other cities, like Dnipropetrovsk is not very good. We're talking much on this because they're not investing into the Aerovokzal and the runway and so on. So what are the plans for the ministry in this respect in terms of the state airports? We see the good dynamic. Boryspil is the most dynamically developing airport, so we're planning at least in short period of time to keep it state-owned, to make corporatization, as we did with Ukrzaliznytsia and Ukrpochta, and then to look at the strategic decision of what we should do further. Probably, I cannot say that this is a strategy, just my thoughts. It's like a private opinion here, that it could be worse in a 5-6 years time to look for a strategic investor there, along with the state ownership, because Kyiv has a good opportunity as a hub airport. It has shown this during the last years, especially if MAU will be developing in the same way and with the same strategy as a communicator between East and West, between Asia and Europe, which they started to do now and more or less effectively. In terms of smaller airports, we are currently developing the fund, and it started operating from the end of the last year. It's quite a specific thing, so they're not so public, but still. For the financing of the airports, it's like infrastructure developing fund. Unfortunately, it didn't start financing at the end of the year. We are planning to do this this year, but one of its main goals will be the financing of the runaways, because runaway in the aircraft business is one of the most difficult parts. It required a huge investment, and the payback period is quite long, so it's the best things where the state can spend money, because private business doesn't spend money on these things. And we have the priority projects, first of all in Odessa, where there is a huge demand for air transportation, but the runway is really in bad shape. Everybody who has ever landed in Odessa knows it quite well. Yes, and also in other smaller cities like Vinnytsia, Chernovtsi, Kherson, and others.
I'm not sure how much time we have left, but we haven't lost too many people. One guy is leaving right now, but I'd like to perhaps, I'll tell my story quite briefly here. My name's John Shmorhun. I'm a Canadian. I moved to Kyiv 15 and a half years ago. This September will be 16 years. When I first moved here, I worked for various investment banks. I was the founder and managing partner of Concord Capital. I was also the chief operating officer at Dragon Capital. We were responsible for a lot of the government privatization in the early 2000s and starting really the Ukrainian stock market. We privatized Ukrtelecom and many other companies, and really took Ukrainian companies out of government ownership and out of coupon, where employees of companies had shares, stock certificates of a company. We brought these to the market. So why am I here talking about real estate? Well, I reiterate Dan's comment. The equity market is finished. I've been always an investor in real estate here in Ukraine, and I absolutely love real estate from a money-making point of view. Let's maybe less on the emotional about Ukraine point of view. I think Ukraine goes in fabulous, predictable cycles of good, and bad. But as a person that, as a businessman that doesn't mind making money, I love that. I feel like I'm in Groundhog Day, if you know the movie. I keep reliving bad times and good times here in Ukraine every couple of years. I think it's absolutely fabulous. So for the last couple of years, since 2000, we purchased a lot of properties here personally, myself with some partners, sold them in 2007. Perhaps we were lucky. Never thought I'd see that opportunity again, but now I'm seeing that opportunity again. And we are absolutely buyers of residential property and hopefully office and commercial property here in Kyiv. I love this market. I think real estate's the best asset class for several reasons. One, it doesn't necessarily depend on government infrastructure spending. It doesn't depend on some politically or an individual that controls a large part of the economy, where he's the holder of the company and you're a shareholder beholden to his will. We control the assets. Actually, I think the ownership and title of apartments and residential property here in Ukraine is quite safe, very safe. I've never heard of a story of anyone losing their property unless they did something illegal or purchased their property illegal in the first place, and probably serves them right. So myself and my partner, two American partners, who both have been in former CIS countries for 10 and 20 years, have set up a fund here and are investing in real estate. Another reason why I love this market is because it's concentrated. I think Kyiv is the capital of 45 million people, and it's very easy to identify certain areas of the city that are more popular or perhaps more expensive than others. And I think the cycles are very repeatable. The only reason why I bring up FDI is because to me that's a direct measurement of what people are putting into this country, and it directly impacts real estate prices. Not to mention access to financing. Right now, there is zero probability of getting a mortgage at any sort of unreasonable terms even. And this, of course, as the banking system recovers and financing recovers for mortgages for individuals, I see the real estate market here. Personally, I might feel that it will repeat what it did before, but that seems unrealistic. So let's just say it will do very, very, very well. So this is what we're currently working on here. I'm happy to take any questions on specifically what we're doing. We have quite a niche business in the real estate market, so it's a specific strategy. I just kind of wanted to, sorry Dan, tell my story because it's maybe positive from a business point of view, but as opposed to the other things about Ukraine in general. Yes, Dan?
My question about real estate is the following. It's, I think, a very important question. Once we were to make a real estate investment and to purchase a building, from what I understand, that unless we do it through a Cyprus shell company, we would have a hard time returning our money in US dollars back to the States because of the currency controls that are implemented by the central bank today. That's the first part. And the second part, we wouldn't even be able to collect our rents, our lease payments, and take that out in the form of dividends because that loophole has been closed by the central bank. Is that correct?
In general, that is correct. The way I'm looking at the market here is, okay, perhaps I'm not personally a believer in fundamental political reform in Ukraine, and I'm sorry, but I am a believer that these dividend controls on Cyprus shell companies and repatriation of funds are a temporary issue. It is absolutely true, and this is part of the not supporting small and medium enterprises here, that it is very difficult here with currency controls for companies like ours to do business and be profitable. We are perhaps lucky that there's very little investment here, and so our company is relatively very small. There are ways to set up absolutely legal Ukrainian companies that are owned by Cyprus companies and repatriate the rental earnings. But yes, it is under a one-tax system through an entrepreneur structure, as they call it in Ukraine, with 5% top-line tax, which is a very good structure. As we are collecting rents or any money here, it automatically used to be 75%, now it's 50% gets converted into hryvnia. So we take substantial currency risk. In addition, I believe the restriction on dividends to Cyprus companies has been lifted, but that was just in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know anyone that has paid dividends. So that's kind of one of these things that's kind of in the middle. But still, as far as I'm concerned, we're still in a buying phase, and we need funds on shore, so we're not looking to that yet, and we would expect it to. But still, I'm not sure how.
I mean, I just would like to say that there are legitimate legal ways, not only by having a Cyprus-based structure, and I guess that has to be a proper, professional advice and legally including, but there are, and not only limited to that geography, and maybe not only in a framework of dividends. When you come to investment structuring and of various products, and I would like to point out on the positive sides of the currency issue. For example, if you have a good, solid real estate product in a commercial space, office, retail, or in a hospitality market, majority of your income can be fixed or pegged to the dollar. Yes, it is true that you're getting payment in local currency, but at the same time, you still fixed to a dollar, while many of your costs, they're fixed to a hryvnia, to local currency. And actually, when there were fluctuations, this is not exaggeration, we actually benefited from that, and marginality increased. So you really can be creative in increasing your margins, and you have to consider that as well. Do you really need to take everything out, or it depends on your cost structure, your implementation strategy towards the market, and so on and so forth. So there are, positive aspects to it as well.
Hello, gentlemen. My name is Leon. I wanted to ask about the real estate market. So basically, as I've understood, your company is investing in real estate and renting it. Is there any way how individual investor can join your company, for example, bring you like $100,000 and get a piece of the whole pool of your real estate that you rent, that you give for rent?
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean, we are a public company that accepts individual investors. We have restrictions, of course. It has to be professional investors because of the size of our company, our fund. I'm happy to talk about that further. I think, and I of course hate to turn down an investor, but as a Ukrainian, I'd be glad to put you in touch with good brokers or something like that. You could probably take advantage of this yourself. That said, as a foreigner, and I got to be honest, I don't like to say that, well, I like to say that we're adding value, that's for sure, but it's hard to give ourselves a compliment. The market here is incredibly not transparent, incredibly difficult, and it can be, real estate can be a real mess. So I have no doubt that a professional investor here adds a lot of value and can help you invest the money.
So you mean basically if I want to invest, I need to invest through your abroad company, yes? There is no direct way to buy, for example, shares of some kind of public, joint public
Ukrainian company?
fund? Yeah.
To be honest, I don't know. Do you know? Our current structure is absolutely through a Cyprus company, and anyone can invest in a Cyprus company, including Ukrainians.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely.
Regarding investments in real estate, Is there a perspective for real estate investment trusts in Ukraine?
A REIT, REI, a real estate investment trust.
Yeah, as in the United States.
Yes, absolutely. Well, there are look, one of the problems with a REIT is that it's a specialized legal structure that costs $120,000 a year just for the legal costs, in addition to substantive offshore and jurisdictional costs. The problem with Ukraine is that when you raise enough money to justify that type of structure, we're staying small for purpose. I mean, to have $100 million, like when I was at Dragon, Dragon has an AIM-listed real estate fund of a couple $100 million. You're forced to invest into large assets like malls and that type of thing. And I am frankly cautious in investing in assets of those size, as could be proven by what happened with Dragon on several occasions. So we are staying small. Anything like a REIT, and maybe, Dan, did you want to say something about this? No? Something like a REIT would simply be too expensive to set up for the size of investment and the size of investment both that we could deploy here in Ukraine. It's hard to invest $400 million. It's hard to invest in real estate here profitably $100, $200 million. And it costs $100,000, $120,000 a year to set up a REIT. So that's the major problem. That's one of the problems with Ukraine is you can't attract enough investment to have enough economies of scale to set up a proper legal structure.
I just would like to add as a recommendation as well for the gentleman earlier is that with the ballpark of about 100,000, just to look as an additional opportunity of a direct investment into the property, because as I mentioned, my personal belief, the market right now is at the bottom, and sometimes if you have a proper partner or a proper broker, as was recommended, you can find decently small but nice high street retail units or whatever similar, which you can invest at about that ballpark. And you can really analyze the demand side, who would like to be there, and you can have income participation investment immediately, and you control the asset by yourself without being part of a difficult structure, whether it's a trust, investment fund, this geography, other geography. You have your personal investment, your personal real estate, which also can be a vehicle for mortgage going forward for your further expansion if you're already generating income from the current purchase.
Yeah, absolutely agree. It's probably cheaper for you to do it yourself, and I'd be glad to help. I mean, like I said, I'm happy to take investment, but I'd rather do the right thing for people, so glad to help. Any other questions? I think it's been a long panel, so thank you very much. They started playing the music, so thank you very much.